Hello, everybody, and welcome back. If your online business is whale driven, meaning a large percentage of your revenue is driven by a small percentage of your audience, and you're buying installs from ad networks or ad partners, today I'm going to show you how to optimize your strategy by identifying and only reinvesting in those ad networks that provide you the best whales. So in the analysis behind me, we're looking at all ad networks compared to each other. And for each ad network, we're looking at the top 10% of spenders, and then we're looking at their average lifetime revenue. So what you can see with this is the orange or yellow trend line that's above all the other trend lines is ad network 12. And the average lifetime revenue for those whales as compared to the other ad networks is about 50% higher, which grants you, the marketer, the opportunity to reinvest more of your marketing budget into ad network 12. So what we're going to do now is move over to MySQL, and I'll show you how to rebuild this analysis for your exact business context. So let's go. All right, so here we are in MySQL, and the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you a few records out of this installs table. Okay, this is just record level data by customer, just representing this customer's install or installs. So the first thing we want to do is we only want to look at paid installs. So let's add something to our where clause here and say where attribution network is not null. Okay, great. And you can tell we're only looking at paid installs because here in this install type column, the value just says paid. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is select the very first install instance per customer. So as you know, within the mobile games industry, there's a ton of retargeting campaigns, which is identifying customers that have gone inactive or have lapsed from your business and retargeting them and asking them to install a second, third, or fourth time. So let's make sure that we only take the first install instance per customer out of this data set. So we will do that using a window function, and I'll show you how to do that now. So we want the customer ID. We do want the attribution name because in our analysis we are comparing ad networks to each other. And then we're going to want the install date. And then here's our index or window function. So row number over. So partition by or by customer. We want to order by the install date time ascending. We just call this install index. So what this is going to do is for every install per customer, it's going to order them ascendingly. So you'll have the first install, the second, the third, the fourth, and then it'll just scribe a value of 1 next to the first install, a value of 2 next to the second install, and a value of 3 next to the third install. And if there's a fourth or fifth one, it'll assign values as well, values of 4 and 5. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, cool. So we have a great example right here with the customer ID ending in 2514. And what we see is their first install with your business happened in January of 2023. And we successfully scribed a value of 1 here. And then after January, they installed a second time in August of 2023. So to represent that, we scribed a value of 2 next to this second install. So given this, the next thing we need to do is just save all of this into a subselect, and we can call it first install. And then what we want to do is say we only want the first install. Any subsequent installs we just want to drop. So we will do our first install, referencing this data or this subselect, and this column to be equal to 1. And then we're going to bring up the column or field names from our subselect underneath. So we only care about these 3 fields. So let's put it up here. And then we got to add the prefix name to say that we are retrieving data from the subselect here named first install. So that's how that prefix works. Okay. So let's make sure our query is working. Okay, great. So if you remember in our analysis, we're basically tracking average lifetime revenue for these whales or these spenders that are in the top 10%. And we're doing it over time. We're doing it by days since install. So because of that, we need leading data. So let's just look at installs from November of 2023 because it's December of 2024 now, and we want to have at least 365 days of leading data for us to look at and analyze. So I will show you how to add that filter into our where clause so that we only return installs from 2023. So what we're going to do is a date format. We'll say this. So what this is going to do is whatever the install date is, it could be September 3rd, 2024. It's going to take that value and it's going to revert it to the first of the month. So September 3rd, 2024 to September 1st, 2024. Okay, cool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the current date, and the current date as of this video is December 30th, 2024. So we're going to take that and we're going to put that current date in here. So what that's going to do is it's going to take the value of December 30th, 2024, and it's going to revert it to the first day of the month. So December 1st, 2024. So how do we go from December 1st, 2024 to November 2023? Well, I'll show you how. So what we're going to do is a date add, and we're going to add negative 13 months to December 1st, 2024 to get us to November 1st, 2023. And what we're doing is setting the install date to the first day of the month and only taking those that equal November 1st, 2023. So let's run a couple of records here and I'll show you that the installs are just going to be coming from that month and that year, November of 2023. Great, so if you look at our third column here, those are the only install values you see. Okay, great, so we're ready to move on to the next step. So let's go ahead and put all of this into a subselect and we'll call it just installs, that's fine. And then the next thing we need to do is bring those fields up from the previous subselect. And we need to change out the prefix, right? Because all of this data, all of these nested subselects is essentially called installs. Okay. So now that we have done that, what we need to do is bring across dates that are greater than or equal to the install date so that we have those leading 365 days to do that analysis. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a table in our database, which is just a table of dates. So it's called dim date. And as you can see, we have our column of dates right here, the second column. So let's do a left join over to this table. And our entire subselect is called installs. We're going to call this dim date table just dates. So we'll do our join now, which will be dates. So dates referring to this SQL table, and then the date column. So the date has to be greater than or equal to the installs.install date. And we're going to add this right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to order our records so I can show you visually that this is working. Okay, great. So we have this customer ending in 536. That was a paid install that came in on Ad Network 17, and they installed November 23rd, 2023. And we have to check to see, were we able to bring across this install date value and all values greater than that? And the answer is yes. As you can see, we brought back the install date, which is November 23rd, 2023. And then we were able to bring in all leading dates after that, beginning with November 24th, November 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th. Now, the next thing we need to do is, since we were going to be calculating the average lifetime revenue for spenders, or the top 10% of spenders in each of these ad networks, we need to create a fifth column which represents the running total of revenue for each of these customers by these leading dates. So what we specifically need to do is, for each one of these dates, we need to sum revenue between this date value and the install date. So it's going to be a running total or a cumulative total. So I'll show you how to do that now. We do have a table that has our customer revenue transactions, and I'll show that to you now. The fact player revenue. And here are those revenue transactions. So customer, the purchase date, the day that they bought, and the purchase amount. Great. So let's go ahead and call this entire subselect leading dates. And like we've done in previous steps, let's just bring up the fields from the previous subselect. And now what we need to do is bring across revenue. So let's do a join, but first let's get rid of this order by. Yeah, make sure that when you're writing SQL, to get rid of any artifacts that were left over when you're testing data or testing the query. Okay. So let's call this revenue, and we're going to join on the customer ID. And then we want the purchase date. To be less than or equal to our leading date value. And what that's going to do is it's going to sum revenue between our leading date value and the install date, creating a running or cumulative sum of revenue. So let's grab that leading date value, and then let's simply just sum revenue. We will do revenue dot purchase amount, because we want to sum the purchase amount from table 2. And if no revenue is returned, we're just going to take that null value and we're going to switch it over to a 0 so it doesn't mess up our aggregation. So why do we need to sum revenue? Well, the reason why is it's going to be, this join is going to be potentially bringing across multiple revenue records, right? Because it's going to be bringing across revenue records that are less than or equal to this leading date value. So that could be 5, 10, 15 revenue records. So we want to sum all of them and group by these fields up here. We can call this running total revenue. Okay, let's run a few records, see what our data looks like. Okay, great. So here's our data set, and let me explain it for this customer right here, ending in 2365, paid install coming in on ad network 19. So they installed on November 16, 2023, and we have all of these leading dates, right? And then we have a summation or a running total of their revenue. So what's happening is for each one of these leading dates, it's summing revenue between this leading date value and the install date. So what it's doing is it's saying, okay, this player right here, 2365, bring in some all revenue transactions between their install date, November 16th, and December 15, 2024. And then here, add one more day. Say, okay, this time I want you to sum revenue between 11/16 and December 16th rather than December 15th. And it does it for every one of these leading date values. Okay, great. So we are ready for the next step, which is we're going to use 2 window functions to create our final logic that will allow us to do an average of lifetime revenue only for the top 10% of spenders for each ad network over time by day since install. So let's go ahead and do that. I know it seems like a mouthful. It's really not that bad and super useful. We can just call this entire subselect rev, because we successfully got our revenue in the last step. All right, let's change out these prefixes. And everything is coming from the subselect underneath. Let's add a select statement. So the first thing we need to do that I actually neglected to do in the last step is we need to go back to the subselect underneath and we need to add one more column. And it's going to be really simple. It's just day since install. So we're going to do a date diff between the leading date value and the install date. We'll just call this days since install, and just slip this into the group by here. And we're good. All right, so let's grab this field, bring it up to this statement up here, and just reference it. Okay, very good. So let's look at our data. Okay, great. So here's what we got. We have our customer, the ad network that they installed on, their install date, their day since install, their leading dates, and then a running total of revenue by customer and by leading date. Very cool. So here's what we want to do next. We're going to write a window function, and it's going to look like this. It's going to be a row number over, and what we want to do is partition by just the ad network and days since install, and we want to order by running total descendingly, meaning the customer that has generated the most amount of revenue, the absolute most amount of revenue by attribution network and days since install will receive a value of 1. So we will call this revenue index. And then the next thing we want to do is understand, okay, how many total players, customers, or installs do we have per attribution network and days since install? And ultimately, what we're going to do is divide these two columns to get an understanding of who is eligible to be in the top 10% per ad network per day since install, and then do an average of their lifetime revenue. So we will do a count over partition by just these two fields. We can call this total records. So now I'm going to show you a visual of exactly how this works, so there's no confusion. So let's go ahead and we can do this. Where rev.addNetwork is going to copy this field. Say where the attribution name is equal to addNetwork19, and we want the day since install to be 365. So 365 days from their install date. Okay. I'm going to put some white space here just to remind me to delete this. Okay, let's see what we got. All right. All right, so this is exactly what we want. So we're looking at Ad Network 19, and we're looking at all the customers and the total amount of revenue they have generated from their install date plus 365 days. And you'll see their cumulative revenue right here. And then what we're doing is we're ordering that revenue descendingly, with the top player here that generated the most amount of revenue, which was $200, followed by the second top player or spender who spent $198, and so on and so forth, right? And then we see this value here underneath total records, which is the total number of customers or installs in this specific cohort, which is 309. So we basically have 309 customers or installs for Ad Network 19, and it's saying that by 365 days out from their install date, this is how much revenue they generate. And then we are ordering that revenue descendingly, with the top spender up here, the second top spender here, the third top spender here, so on and so forth. So now what we're going to do is we're going to divide these two columns together to calculate, flag, and see if a customer is eligible to be in the top 10%. So let's go ahead and delete those lines there. we can name all of this top spenders. Let's bring up our fields from the previous subselect. And let's change out that prefix value. And now all we simply need to do is this. So what I'm going to do now is add 2 columns to demonstrate how this logic works. So we will say, you know, let's actually just take this whale index, right? Or index of revenue descendingly. So top spender gets a 1, second top spender gets a 2, etc., etc. We will do this and we will divide it by total records. And then we're going to do this. Case when this division is less than or equal to 0.0 then 1, else 0. And we will call this top 10% flag. You just call this ratio, that's fine. And let's run a few records. Okay, excellent. So if we look at our output data set, what we have here is we have our 4 new columns. We have this revenue index column, which basically takes revenue and orders it descendingly and assigns a 1 to the top spender by add network and day since install. And then we have the total number of customers, or a count of the total number of customers or installs by add network and day since install. And then when we divide this value, this revenue index, by the total records column, what we actually get is the top percentage number per customer. So what this is saying here is we have a whale here because they have an index of 1. So what this means is when we divide these 2 columns together, it's effectively saying underneath this ratio column that this player by this specific ad network and day since install is in the top 0.59%. So you'll notice here that there's no revenue. So when all values are the same, and in this case 0, then what happens is the revenue index just gets randomly assigned because it's the equal value for all records. And that's totally possible since day since install is 0. It's the install date. So people have installed but may not have purchased yet. But that logic does begin to work once players start generating revenue, as you can see in these records right here. Okay, great. So we are ready for the last and final step, which will be the aggregation step. So what we can do is we can delete this ratio column because we don't really need it. And we are going to wrap this in one final subselect that's going to be called ag. Get rid of this limit. We can call this ag. So if we think about our chart, on our x-axis we have day since install, and then the chart itself is segmented by ad network. So we'll bring in attribution name, and then we just want to count, and that's going to be our installs. And then we basically just want a average of their lifetime revenue. And let's be careful to change out that prefix. We'll do an average here. Call this average lifetime revenue. But wait, something is oddly missing. We did all of this work here and we're not even referencing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and just put it in the where clause and say, I just want you to do this where this flag equals 1, meaning we're just filtering for the top 10% per ad network per day since install. Be careful to add in the group by as we make our final aggregation. So we will go up here, grab these two fields because we want our data aggregated by day since install and attribution name or ad network. So we will do group by these fields here below. Let me add a semicolon to represent that we're finished. And then we'll go ahead and run this. Okay, great. So here's our output data set. The only thing I would recommend is let's round these revenue numbers up to the nearest whole number. So I'll show you how to do that. Just go with round and say 0 for 0 decimal places. And we can rerun it quickly and I can show you the cleaned up revenue numbers. Okay, great. So here's our final data set. What we have is the top 10% of spenders per ad network and per day since install with the count of the number of players within the top 10% and then their average lifetime revenue. So let's go ahead and move this over to Excel so we can get a visual of what this looks like when you compare these ad networks to each other and see if there are any applicable insights that we can strategize on. Okay, so here we are in Excel, and this is one of the rare cases where the only thing we have to do is not add any calculated columns, but just move this over to a pivot, just transpose this data just a little bit. So we're going to create a pivot table here, put the attribution name here across the top, day since install here, and then we just want a sum of our average lifetime revenue for these players that made it into the top 10% by day since install. So let's do some label filters here. Less than or equal to 365 days. We just want to look at the leading 365 days. And then let's remove these grand totals. And then let's see if we can turn this into a currency maybe. And let's just do whole numbers for now. All right, let's chart this. Let's chart this and see if anything pops out to us. Okay, awesome. Let me move this legend down below. Okay, great. So let me explain this chart to you. So basically what's happening is if you pick any number on the x-axis, we can pick 100. What that's saying is we're looking at installs 100 days from their install date, and we're calculating who is in the top 10% of spenders. And among those people, we're taking their average lifetime revenue. And then we are charting it and segmenting it by ad network so that we can strategically compare these ad networks. And what this is ultimately showing is ad network 12, which is this bright orange or yellow line up here, is really outperforming the other ad networks. It's saying that the whales coming from ad network 12 are about 50% more profitable or more valuable per person or per person within the top 10%. So this is really great and useful knowledge if your online business is whale driven. And it could be whale driven due to an intentional economy design, or it could be whale driven because you have a host team that hosts your players, or you have a really attractive VIP or loyalty program. But either way, with this information, what you can do as a marketer is reinvest more of your marketing budget into Ad Network 12 so that you get whales that are 50% more valuable than the whales in the other ad networks. I really hope you found this useful. Have a wonderful rest of your day.